on behalf, oops, sorry, thanks, Jessica. Sorry about that. Welcome on behalf of the National Child Passenger Safety Board to this community engagement webinar. Do you hear what I hear? A guide to working with ESL families. Next slide, please. Some reminders. We want to make sure that you do not participate in this webinar if you're operating a motor vehicle. This webinar will be recorded and you can listen to the recording when you safely arrive at your destination. The recording will be posted to childpassengerscpsboard.org/recertification within 1 to 2 business days. For the child passenger safety technicians in attendance, the presentation qualifies for 1 community education credit. Attendance on this webinar is required for at least 45 minutes. Proof of attendance will be emailed 24 hours after the webinar. And this is the location where you can see that posted. Next slide. Please put your questions in the chat feature or the Q&A. Would be happy to be monitoring those and answer those at the end. Next slide. And my name is Kellie O'Riordan. I'm a CPSTI and a certified driver instructor, as well as the program manager for AAA driver education. Valeria Huang is the language services manager for Nationwide Children's Hospital. She earned a master's in human resource development and completed the World Language Education Licensure Program at the Ohio State University. Leveraging her academic experiences, Valerie expands her career in several industries, including banking, nonprofit, and healthcare. Her career journey has been fueled by a passion for empowering interpreters to identify the learning strategy they need to succeed. As an active volunteer in her community, she works with healthcare and social services providers to incorporate cultural awareness into the training curriculum. Valerie is pursuing a doctorate degree in education with research interests in examining practices and supporting factors related to guidance and learning at the workplace. So we absolutely have the perfect person to share this important messaging to you. And we're so grateful that Valerie agreed to be a part of this important outreach. Thank you, Valerie. And I'm going to share my slide. Hopefully you can't see the notes page. I am again Kellie O'Riordan. I am the CPS advocate at risk underserved representative of the National Child Passenger Safety Board. I work as a traffic safety program manager with the AAA Ohio Auto Club, and I am also a passenger safety technician instructor. We have planned time to answer questions at the end of the presentation. And again, as a reminder, please enter your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you. Our objectives for today are to define ESL, EL, and LEP families, identify and discuss challenges and opportunities when working with these families. You can't see them yet? Jessica, if you can unmute.
No, we can't see your slides, Kellie. If you'd like me to run them, just let me know.
Sure. If you can do that, for whatever reason it's not sharing. It is on my side. Thank you.
Sure.
These are real life heroes right here when you help each other. Thank you. And yep, you can pull them all up. That's fine. We are also going to identify and discuss challenges and opportunities when working with these special families. We're going to examine different cultures that CPSTs may work with and what considerations are present. Highlight some resources for first responders for scene triage and ambulance transport, as well as identifying resources for CPSTs and EL families. Next slide, please. So defining LEP, ESL, and EL, there's a lot of different ways to say the same thing, but they can be very different to those educators and advocates. And Valerie really opened my eyes to this. So Valerie, thank you. ESL is what she shared with me. English is a second language. EL, English learning. This is a newer terminology that some other organizations use. And the one that I believe Valerie uses the most is LEP. That's a family with limited English proficiency. So if you see that terminology, this is what it's correlating with. Next slide. So please put some of the cultures you have worked with from countries outside of the United States in the chat as we move forward the next few slides, and we'll take a peek at that. Next slide. Wonderful. So having worked at Nationwide Children's Hospital years ago, and hopefully Carrie Rhodes, who is a phenomenal advocate and CPSTI that's working there now, it's a wonderful program, which is why I wanted to make sure that I gave them their credit when credit's due. And this just depicts some of the cultures you may experience in your child passenger safety outreach. Next slide. So challenges, while it sometimes sounds like a scary word, isn't in my mind, because it's just an opportunity for improvement in a professional and or personal environment. So there can be several challenges when we talk about this topic specifically. Next slide. Some of those challenges include a language barrier, that's an obvious, limited access to interpretive services, depending on the environment that you're in. If it's hospital-based, you may have more resources, say, than an event. Hopefully you have enough time to find out what those languages are ahead of an event, but Valerie will speak to some of those challenges as well. Limited or non-existent CPS laws overseas. And so this is something that when families come to you in any capacity, they may not have child passenger safety laws. So the assumption that they do can be a dangerous one. And so those challenges are present for that. Communication comfort zones. So that can be either from the CPST or that family as far as those comfort zones. And we'll speak more to that as I story share one of the experiences I had in the emergency department. There can be cultural gender role differences than that of the US. And that I have come into contact several times. And that's not just in the hospital setting, but it can also be in some of your classes. If you're an instructor teaching that technician class, you may have experienced that as well. So there could be challenges there. And limited access to CPS resources is the last in that. Next slide. Some opportunities. Developing a partnership with local interpretive services organizations is a wonderful way to really get out there, meet those people that are taking care of these families in addition to you, and truly partner with them to make your organization more impactful when you have that interaction with these families. There's also opportunity to research child passenger safety laws in other countries. So if you know you're going to be hosting an event in a certain population of students, maybe look that information up of those CPS laws in those countries. Professional development and committee implementation. So if you don't have a strong presence with interpreter services or a policies and procedure manual, this is a time that you can maybe develop a committee to implement something like that, to have a program in place for those families. And an inclusivity training opportunity, that goes without saying. This is something that we really need to be aware of in any organization and setting, especially when it comes to protecting these families, which is really what we're doing anytime we're coming into contact with them. Next slide, please. So and there are so many different countries. Thank you so much for putting that in the chat. Some of them that I'm seeing, Mexico, Vietnamese, the Middle East, Nepal, looks like Venezuela, Swahili, Spanish speaking. Yeah, so there are a lot, and you can look in their Somali population. There was a large population of Somali families that I dealt with at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and we'll be speaking about that here shortly as well. So here's these sweet little ones that we come into contact with. The top left is that ambulance transport, and that can be kind of scary, especially if that family doesn't speak English. That can be challenging for those first responders, and we're going to speak briefly about that. Hospital care, a lot of the hospitals and the people that we have here on this call do have a program in place, but we are going to be touching on some resources if you don't. Next slide, please. So first responder resources. When I spoke to a local fire chief, I was speaking with him about what do you do from that first phone call. It could be that 911 call and it could be when you're coming up onto a crash scene. And what they shared with me, both a first responder and that fire chief, is there is a translator book in emergency vehicles where those first responders can go to the language for the patient to read. And there's some general questions. They also refer to a toll-free language line to call where they put the interpreter on the phone, and that would be on speakerphone so they can assist in that triage as well as that patient care. The first responders also call the local hospital to give them information that they will need interpretive services upon arrival to transfer patient and family care. Next slide. So as I mentioned, as I worked at Nationwide Children's Hospital, we had several families that spoke several different languages besides English. And one of the most impactful moments for me as a child passenger safety technician, is when I was assisting a family, a Somalian family. And I didn't know, admittedly, a lot about their culture as far as if I was able to speak to the wife. And I made that big mistake and quickly found out that that was something that I was not to do. So the wife came in, the mother, I should say, and they were level 2. And the mother, of course, was inconsolable. The child was on a backboard, C-spined, and not really speaking appropriately for the mother. She was just, up in arms. And so she was using a lot of body language, but until that interpretive services person got there, we didn't really know how to assist. Obviously, the nurses and the doctors were doing their part, but we couldn't understand what she was trying to say, and it could have been very important information. So they downgraded that child. They finally did very well and put them over to the other side of that emergency department for observation before they were discharged. And the father got there, came back to the room, and there was an interpreter there right before the father got there. And he immediately wanted to dismiss that interpreter. And he said, I don't need you. I speak English. And this was right when I was coming in with a car seat so that they could have that car seat when they were going home. That child was not in a car seat at all and was very lucky to walk away from that crash. When I brought the car seat in and started to educate the mother with our interpretive services person already there, he got in my face, probably about 6 inches away from my face, and pointed at me. He said, "You don't speak to her, you speak to me." And it was just very hostile all of a sudden. And I was just alarmed, thinking that I'm doing the right thing, getting them a car seat, giving that education. And he was extremely upset. What I learned from that is he was upset because his child is hurt. It might have been taken out on me, but I had to assume that innocence, that this is a traumatic moment. There was a crash. He wasn't there. A lot's going on in a very short amount of time. And my job as that child passenger safety advocate and technician is to get them a car seat and to educate them as best that I could. I did involve the discharge planner, as well as the charge nurse, and security was outside of the room because it escalated very quickly. And it was decided per the charge nurse that interpretive services employee would stay in the room because the father was not sharing the information with the mom. So it got sideways really fast. It was a little scary for me. I never had somebody point in my face like that, but the takeaway was that that's just a very scared father, and he was concerned about his child, and we got them the car seat and the education. Next slide. So as far as what I learned from that, I don't know why it's not pulling up. There we go. Sometimes, again, there can be extremely stressful situations, but we just have to assume innocence and know that they just are concerned about their child, and it's a very scary moment for them as well. Next slide. All right. And again, each of these families care about the same thing, keeping their children safe. And that is the last of my slides. I am going to be turning this over to Valerie, the expert in all things interpretive services. So Valerie, take it away.
Can everybody see my slides? Perfect.
Yes.
righty. Make sure I got everything ready. Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction and the story sharing. Hopefully I can elaborate more based on your experience. Good afternoon, good morning. For some of you, it depends on where you are. It's really my honor this afternoon to be here with you all. It's actually indeed my privilege to present and speak on behalf of the immigrant community as well. As the language service manager, former passenger safety program staff, and that's a shame. I was a former CPST. I just didn't get to manage my recertification process. But I'm actually very honored to be here to speak to you. So I have decided to divide my presentation into several segments to first examine cultural languages. And then we will then discuss some of the challenges that we may encounter when working with family from various cultures. So how do we interpret help with effective communication? And lastly, some cultural consideration while working with families from various cultures in the context of child passenger safety. So to begin with, and Kelly mentioned a little bit, the definition of limited English proficiency. They are the one who has a limited ability to read, speak, write, or understand English, which is the primary language we speak in US. Some of you may have heard ESL, and Kelly mentioned that already, which is referred to English as second languages. So you may see some libraries, public libraries, community services, community school offer ESL classes. So LEP, they may be emerging English speakers. With that, they are less likely to receive very important information or be able to access services such as education, social services, and healthcare. And that's more pertain to what I'm doing every day due to the language barrier. In some cases, this can even be a matter of life or death. Ineffective communication can lead to many, many misunderstandings as well. So yeah, you will probably agree with me. It's very difficult to imagine any interaction without effective communication. So from the perspective as us as a provider who provide education or services, and not to mention the individual who come to the new countries have no ideas about what's going on in this new place that they call home now. So culture has been defined in several ways, but I'm trying to put this very simple way that it forms a way of life of a group of people. They present similar behaviors, beliefs, and value, but the list can go on and on. Therefore, cultural diversity make communication difficult as people's mindsets may be different. So there's a lot of hidden message and hidden cultures that we would not be able to just guess and make assumptions. Therefore, when we communicate with people of different culture, there are many factors that will contribute to some communication barrier. Luckily though, languages barrier is the most obvious barrier. Basically, when people speak two different language, they just cannot communicate with each other at all. So I will come back to that more later. So simply put, culture is very complex and it's very unique. It's not static, and it's often hard to encapsulate it in a very simple sentence. Some define culture as a way of life, including arts, beliefs, and value that can pass down from generation to generation. So I'm a first generation Asian American. So my kids, they're growing up in in a household that we may practice some of the Asian culture, we eat Asian food, but they are constantly seeking identity that, wait, am I American? Am I Asians? Okay, am I Asian American? So what does that mean? So in some cases, this can be a very challenging for provider who is working with a group of community members that from diverse of community cultural backgrounds. So in some case, for example, a community member from different culture, they may form a neighborhood with a high concentration of people with similar ethnic backgrounds. So for example, Chinatown, Italian village, German village, Little Tokyo, K-Town, and then you can have the list go on and on. So therefore, it's very challenging to determine what constitutes culture for an ethnic group. Also, there's elements of different generation, level of acculturation, how long they've been here, gender, different culture maybe has a different gender who dominate the decision-making of the family, kind of relate to Kellie's experience that maybe the head of household is the father that who will make decision. Therefore, the father that Kellie encountered demand that I'm the one you should speak to, because I'm the one make decision. But that's just the way that they were brought up, and then that's the culture they practice. So also there's a religious, geographical location. East Coast, West Coast, you may see more ethnic background, like Chinatown, like people who live together that may not even need to learn the English language that they can actually get by or manage their daily life. But when I'm from Midwest, some of the cities that in Midwest, you probably have very minimum diverse cultural community members that they just have to culturalize and then adapt to the new culture, learning English, and then learn the way that here, how Americans should live. So typically, one thing I want to share is that no human being can be considered as a cultural expert. So culture is, let me see, so barrier to service access. After anyone who arrive in a new countries, especially refugee, they typically dependent on professional support to re-establish their life here in this new country. However, there are a lot of research and evidence-based that document that refugees face a lot of barrier when they are seeking access to all type of services, especially when they have undergone like trauma, family loss, separation, and have lived in poor living condition, for example, refugee camps for a long period of time, and they feel uncertain about their future. Some of the community members I have worked with have stayed in the refugee camp for over 20 years before being resettled in US. So this traumatized experience also is the reason that many immigrants and refugees, some of the first responder may be able to share that, is they have trouble trust law enforcement or anyone in uniform, just because of their past traumatized experience leading to that mistrust. On top of this, they may experience cultural barriers, language barriers, and isolation, which are just some of the factors that a refugee has to deal with upon arrival. They also bring with them different driving behaviors, different passenger safety knowledge and practice, and child safety seat use from their prior life experience. LEP family, they often experience challenges when navigating this system in a new country. For example, social services. And education is another big topic that why children are in school age. When the teachers say IEP and then family have no idea what does that mean. Despite that, there's a legislation mandating child restraint use for child passenger. And then I'm sure that based on your experience, most parents may have heard the rule that children should sit in the rear seat. However, some parents may relax these rules for a variety of reasons, including sometimes social pressures that their family are not following the rule. Why should I, right? Or they maybe go out with the other family together. They just have that peer pressure that no, that's fine. I don't have to do that. Also, the perception of the law and regulation, not knowing that what's the consequence of not following the law regulation. So they may think, oh, it's okay since I'm just driving a few blocks away for the grocery shopping. And another, what I've observed is booster seats and not having the children sit in the front seat is another hard to reach topics. They may be not enough, some family may not have enough car seats for their every child because they have limited income resources, and then they have so many priority to manage. So they may have to use the hand-me-down car seats, get it from friends, try to get something that just kind of make sure that, oh, I'm following the rule, even though the car seat is already out of date or under recall. Not knowing that sometimes there's a free car seat services that they can actually obtain the car seats for free. Again, there's a limitation of access to resources and services available, and due to a lot of barrier. So that being said, I believe that CPS technician and instructors like yourself have been working tirelessly to apply your expertise at various community-based activity. So therefore, this community car seat events for immigrant and refugee community, such as child safety seat checks, which I have lucky to be part of it before, where parents and caregivers, they are able to receive education and hands-on assistance, are really, really valuable resources, and especially for those families who are not familiar with the child passenger safety law. Another thought that I want to share is we're providing the same content to the caregivers. Everyone may have different perspectives. For this is coming from my adult learning perspective that people may perceive differently. So basically, they may interpret or convey the message we call learning transfer, the content based on their own prior experience and knowledge. So you can see that how the message can lost during that whole teaching and learning process. Also, parenting style will be really very important because again, they coming from different cultures, maybe that they just don't reinforce the child need to sit in the car seat. So they are not able to justify that, wait, there's a risk, or I don't want to get in all the trouble to struggle with my child because they just don't want to sit in the car seat. Also, another common myth is for some of the parents that I have worked with is that just because of the insecure sense of I'm in a new countries, now my children's growing up here in this land of opportunity, they are my futures, having them sit in the real seats, they feel insecure, uncertain, they like their kids to sit next to them. So again, there's a challenge for them to justify that, what's the risk, and then how important for me to have my children sit next to me. My personal experiences, I remember a few years back, my mother-in-law visited us from Taiwan, where I grew up with. We were on a car ride to Chicago. From Columbus, it's about almost 6 hours drive. So it's a long road trip. And my daughter, she hated the car seat like most of the child. So she started to get crying and crying. So I know she was just fussy. And then I have dealt that before. She maybe cried 10 minutes and she would just fall asleep because I just have to tell her, sorry, you just have it in the car seat. So we turn on her favorite music. A few minutes later, she stopped crying. So wait, is that magic? No, we found out my mother-in-law was holding her in her arm. We were like, okay, we have to pull in the side, ask my mother-in-law to put her back to the car seat. So you know the rest. That upset my daughter even more. So it's a good intention for my mother-in-law. And again, this is the way that she thought, oh, it's okay because she's crying. And I just don't want my granddaughter crying. It's okay if I can just hold her for a few minutes while the vehicle is actually moving. So that's another personal story I have that also it's a lot of common myths from a lot of family from different cultures. So moving on to interpreter, which is my favorite topic. So if you're working with family with limited English proficiency, most likely you need to work with interpreter. The role of interpreter is to facilitate communication. They do not speak on behalf of the family. They do not provide advice. Basically, they are conduit to transmit the message. So keep in mind that if you are the one providing the teaching or the car seats or provide a system, you are the one have the expertise in child passenger safety, while the interpreter, the primary focus is to bridge the linguistic barrier. So in other words, having an interpreter working with you, the primary purpose of the interpreter is to make sure everybody in that encounter on an equal footing so the family can fully participate in their own learning process. We don't ask interpreter to teach them or to dominate the session. Also, each family is unique, despite of even they from the same culture, they create their own subculture within their culture. Therefore, interpreter also are not a cultural expert. More information on interpreting. So interpreting involves communicating an oral or sign message between two persons who do not share common languages. For sign language, and here we most refer to American Sign Languages. Interpreting mode is the way that how message can be converted and transmitted from one language to another. So there's no best interpreting mode. And if you have working as interpreter with interpreter before, you may notice that they shift their modality just because of that interpreter, they are trained to adjust their interpreting mode based on the circumstance and anyone who involved the interpreting encounters. So for example, consecutive interpreting, which is the most common mode of interpreting. It involves rendering the message from the source to the target, so English to Somali or Somali to English. After the speakers, the person who signed pause. So ideally, in order to allow interpreter to communicate effectively and accurately, if you work with interpreter, make sure you pause often so interpreter can remember what you just said and comprehend the message, then interpreting everything accurately. Another interpreting mode is simultaneous interpreting, which involve render the message just a few seconds, usually 3 to 4 second delay, but the person will continue to talking. So you can imagine two people are talking at the same time, it's gonna be very busy. So it's not really common that interpreter will utilize it, but this is very common in conference interpreting. So I was wondering maybe someday if you have a conference that is focused on education, on child passenger safety, maybe you have community member that invited to attend those type of conferences that who may require interpreter, then you will need a conference interpreter to interpret simultaneous for the instructor or the lecturer or the speakers, so to speak. Another one is site translation. So in our field, you have a lot of maybe checklist or a flyer or education material, step-by-step instruction. If it's possible, have that translate into other languages, that will be really helpful. But if not, interpreters are trained to provide site translation, meaning that if it's a 1 page of simple documents, maybe some bullet points, they can read and then verbally explain it to the family who are LEP. There's also another option is you as a instructor who can actually go over the content in that documents and then verbally explain everything and then allow interpreting what you just explained based on that written document, and encourage the family to take notes. There's a pen, there's a paper, they can always take notes in their languages. Last but not least, summarization. So this is an interpreting mode that we do not use often because when a person summarizes a message, some of the details may lost in translation. Therefore, summarization only is necessary in emergency and when one of the party who cannot pause, maybe anxiety, emotional distress, that they just cannot pause, allow interpreter interpreting, and then you will notice that interpreter will just jump in and start to kind of summarize that the day was upset, he was asking what happened, and then so on and so forth. So while working with an interpreter, it's very, very important to support the LEP, which is the family or caregivers with limited English proficiency, for being able to express their self in based on their own communication intention. So what does that mean? So when the interpreter speak their language and help with communication, interpreter does not make decision for the caregiver. Therefore, while working with the caregiver via interpreter, make sure you speak directly to the caregiver and the interpreter will render or sign the message. Avoid saying, tell mom, ask mom, or because it get confused. So basically you talk directly to the caregiver and interpreter will interpret in first person. I thought about share a little bit about what people often confuse with translation and interpretation. So both services involve adapting language from one to another, but there are a few very important differences. Interpreter convey spoken verbal message or sign, American Sign Language interpreter or a Spanish interpreter. While translator, they convey a written message, which means maybe you have a piece of flyer or a document that you need somebody to translate for you. And then what translator will do is they will get a computer, type everything up. They have time to evaluate, revise the word and sentences before deliver and publishing the translation. Interpreter service is real time. It can be through the phone and can be through video and could be in person. Another very important note that it's bilingual. Anyone who is bilingual doesn't mean that they have the capacity to interpret, because when you are bilingual, you speak one language back and forth. But when you are interpreting, you are trained and learn, and then actually based on experience to convey language, convey message between two languages. So that take a lot of training. So try not to make assumption that anyone who is bilingual can interpret. That being said, it's very important that the agency and organization you work with has a language access plan that can help ensure that staff members are aware of what to do when we have encounter with any individual with limited English proficiency, and then especially when they need assistance or services. Ensure that your agency and organization, regardless of the size, how many staff, should also have access to high quality language services. While working with LEP, first of all, we definitely need to identify if they need languages. Some of, again, emerging language learner, they're able to talk about language, talk about weather, say hi and smile at you. But then when you go down to the technical detail, they just smile, and culturally, they just don't wanna offend you because you are from their culture, being the one provide instruction, resources. You are the authority figures that some of them, they feel like they don't want to offend you by saying, I don't understand. So basically the whole time they just smile, nodding their head, but doesn't mean that they really understand. So it's also very important to ask what language the family speak. Do they speak more than one language? Because sometimes we may have challenging with finding one resources, and asking for another option will be really to maximize your resources. For example, we have a lot of family that they come to us, say, I speak Spanish, and then we found out their Spanish then we send Spanish interpreter, and Spanish interpreter say, I have no idea what type of Spanish this person was talking about. So it ended up that family's first language is Haitian Creole, because they have a second migration. They moved to Chile, so they learned Spanish as second language. And now they moved to US. So it depends on the question was triage. They thought, oh, you're asking me what language or where I'm coming from. And then it became Spanish. So when we sent Spanish interpreter, communication was totally like not, there's no intersection at all. And we asked family, are there another language you speak? And that's why they say, oh, actually, I feel much comfortable speaking Haitian Creole. So we have to change the assignment, send a Haitian Creole interpreter instead. Voila, everything can communicate well. Also, another example for Somali community, Columbus, Ohio, where I am right now, is the second largest Somali speaking community. Minnesota is the largest Somali speaking community. Somali family, they may live in one European countries before arriving US. Therefore, they may speak different languages, and also some of them not necessarily read, because they growing up only learn how to speak the language, not necessarily learn how to read the languages. So basically be sensitive, ask more questions to find out what type of accommodation they need in terms of languages. That will be really, really helpful. So a little bit about what we do here at Nationwide Children's. I am responsible of managing language services provided for patients and families who under the care of NCH, Nationwide Children's, and no cost to them. We don't charge them. We don't charge to insurance. It's all on us, because there's a law and regulation that mandated that all the hospital, all the program agency that receive federal funding need to provide language services. Back to our team. We are a team of 25 staff interpreter, and we have 3 staffing coordinators. Staff interpreter receive pre-scheduled on-site interpreting assignments, but they also go to emergency rooms. They also log into the phone and video to take on-demand call in between assignments. We also have contract with interpreter vendors to support high demand. So that's another resources your agency can actually make sure that any institution that you collaborate, find out what type of resource you are able to access, what was their step, so that way you know what option you have. We also work very close with our staff passenger safety program coordinator, Kellie, who provide technical assistance training and educational resource for patient and family. It's really great because we work very close together. She always makes sure that the family has an interpreter in person to explain how important it is to understand the car seat safety. It's very family common that when our office received an update from our staff interpreter, which they thought they're just going to ED to discharge the family, maybe only 20 minutes for the after visit summary, but the visit extended because we found out that the children does not have the car seat, and then they have to call the coordinator to come in, and then nevertheless, the whole team just mobilized to ensure that the child is safety before they're being discharged. So meaning that they're being safely transported in their car and through the proper restraint. So that's very, very important, and very fortunate that we have our in-house program to support that. So to summarize, moving on to maybe providing some tip is providing culturally sensitive services really will help enhancing child safety, child passenger safety in underserved community. So for underserved community, it's very broad, but in this context, I'm more referring to anyone who comes different culture, has a language barrier or cultural barrier. Some also refer to culturally responsive services. So sounds like a very big task, right? So allow me to kind of break it down a little bit. So we cannot be a cultural expert. Some people refer cultural competency. There's no way we can learn everything. We can be sensitive though to cultural diversity, be sensitive, be more mindful, and then empathy, the caregiver's life situation by have very open, non-judgmental attitude. And then believe me, they can sense that. As long as you put down that judgmental, not assumption, avoid personalizing, stereotyping. Most family from different culture, they really, really appreciate whatever they receive, whatever service they receive. Also invite them to explore, explain what kind of barrier, what kind of challenge they have. How can I help you better? Be aware that different way people communicate different cross cultures. There's a verbal, nonverbal, like Kellie mentioned. Some people may have body languages, but it may perceive as aggressive, but it's not necessary because that's in their culture. And I learned from my staff that some of them, they talk like this, but that is not meaning that I'm very aggressive, I'm very dominating. It's just the way that they just like, okay, I'm talking to you, I'm very engaging with you. So this is totally a big cultural shock, right? Eye contact. In some of the Eastern or Caribbean culture, meeting another person's eye can be perceived as rude or aggressive. So understand that will be actually discard some of your assumption. That will be really, really helpful in building the trust. Body language is another interesting, I mentioned a little bit head nodding. So I learned from my friend from India. So when they talk to you, they tilt their head like side to side. It looks like they're shaking their head, no, 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 but that actually means yes, 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 meaning that, oh, I'm actually listening to you. I'm actively listening to you. But here, most people will nod their heads like, okay, okay, but somebody from India may do this. And then, so we have a cultural shock. because then the communication are not intersections now. So the way they talk may have certain rhythm and tone, which are actually just a matter of pitch when speaking. So Kellie's experience for the Somali family, we experience that every day because I have 5 Somali staff. They speak, the way that the language is very high pitch, like very loud. For us, we think it's loud, but no, it's not loud. It's just the tone, the language. Some of you learn music, you can relate to that because it's just how the language has a different rhythm and tone. I used to work in community members, and I have 2 co-workers. They always talk to each other in their languages. And we always think they were fighting with each other or arguing until one day I cannot just assume. I asked them, are you guys mad at each other? And they look at me just like, what? No, we're just talking about what we're gonna eat tonight. Okay, they are not arguing, but the tone sounds like they were arguing. So I made a mistake by assuming because the tone of their language is not what I'm familiar with. So how can we work effectively with immigrant family who do not share the same language with us? There's a very easy one. It's keep the message simple. Pause, break it down to different segments. Simple sentence after you ask question, pause, smile, and wait until they respond. Speak in even past. Sometimes we work with, I have observed some of the provider working with family without interpreter. And because the communication barrier, they started to use single words. They started to raise their voice very loud, or they started to speak very slow. So if anyone who has a limited English proficiency, it doesn't help if you speak loud or very slow because they just have no idea what you're talking about. So coming back to having an interpreter is very important. Providing feedbacks and request feedback as well. Even if you're using very simple words and then shorten sentence, again, going back to the body language and the cultural barrier, they may just smile and not afraid to ask questions. So it's very important to make sure that communication is two-way. So wait until caregiver acknowledge with feedback. So another tip is asking clarifying questions. In healthcare, we use the term for nursing particularly, we call it teach back. So basically ask them to state in their own words what they need to know or to do about, for example, their car seats. Right, and then of course, if you have interpreter what they teach back to you, and then you will be able to check. Okay, get it? Yes, maybe let's go over this one more time. Another example is I want to be sure I explain how to install the car seat clearly. So it's putting on us, not on them. So can you please explain it back to me so I can be sure that I explain everything I need to? So again, it's maybe more supportive attitude that will be really, really helpful because misunderstanding go unnoticed. Again, with cultural barrier, they just don't, there's a kind of afraid to ask question or to challenge your authority. Another question, another common we kind of like situation we hear is, I have the trouble too. Cannot, can, well, won't. Everybody's so confused. And then not to mention anyone who was limited English proficient. So if you say, I want to help you, some of them may hear, I won't help you. So which can perceive as, oh, you're not caring, you don't want to help. But certainly they will not tell you. They just basically, okay, fine, you don't want to help me. I will just give up. So again, it's just a lot of barrier that could happen, but slow down, ask questions, that will be really helpful. Another observation we have is everybody here like to use acronym. It's very challenging for people who are from different culture understand what does that means. So basically use plain English, avoid acronym. Sometimes idiom is very challenging for people from different culture to understand, and not to mention interpreter. One example we hear a lot is, oh, we can kill two birds with one stone. Wait, am I saying right? I think so. So that sounds like in the context, but if interpreter word by word, you probably get family like so confused because I don't know what does that mean, right? Especially when you schedule them to come to the car check. Oh, we can do this, and so you can come and you can get your free car seat. We will kill two birds with one stone, and then we can install for you. And they will look at it. Wait, what does that to do with bird, right? So last but not least, offer written information is when they are available. I always like when it comes to education, especially for adult and for LEP individuals, sometimes visual aid communication will be really helpful to solve the language barrier, because it's very easy for them to relate to the message very visually, and then can learn that based on what they see from the picture. I think I cover everything. So basically, positive result can come from trusting relations by offering support, asking question, asking clarification. That's already show the positive supportive attitude that building the trust, and family are more willing to help and ask question at some point of time. I have a lot of questions that is always get asked every day. Can I have my family interpret for me? So family members or friends cannot be relied upon interpreting, except only when there's an emergency situation that you are not able to get a hold of the interpreter, or you call the language line and it still get on hold and it's waiting for interpreter to be connected. Anyone who are not trained as an interpreter, they may omit, add, substitute with whatever they think, and sometimes they volunteer answers because they want to help too. For example, a family member may summarize information, interject their own opinions, and impose their own judgments. So all this above things that I just mentioned, interpreters should never do. So to wrap up, it's the federal guideline that any agency receiving federal funding should provide meaningful access to limited English proficient individual, which means that language services is very important. Each city, county, or state may adopt different language access law and policy. So work with your agency to find out more details. And for example, state of Oregon, their Health and Human Services has a credentialing process, and the state manage a certified interpreter registry. So the guideline is only this state certified interpreter can provide interpreting services. So that's in Oregon. There's also a national certification program that I'm happy to report that all our staff interpreter and nationwide children's, they are nationally certified. So which means that they need to pass both written and oral exam in order to be certified as a certified interpreter. With advanced technology, phone interpreting services are on demand and available 24/7. While working with caregivers who speak limited English proficiency, utilize interpreter services, and the focus can be on engaging a successful interaction and communication, while we need to educate caregivers in a positive and supportive manner, and the trust relations already built. We also want to motivate them to utilize the best practice regarding the child passenger safety. And also, instead of tell them what's the law and regulation, tell them what's the consequence without following the law and regulation. So I'm going to end with a message that adults learn differently. Diversify the workforce within this field will really support effective communication. For example, have bilingual technician working directly with caregivers in language other than English will be really, really helpful. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'm super grateful to be here. And then we can start to take questions, but I probably need to stop sharing first.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Such a wealth of knowledge. I can't begin to thank you for all of the insight and experience you have to help our CPSTs and instructors throughout this country. As a reminder, this and so many other webinars are available to you. We are so grateful for all that you do in the communities. And there's a webinar series. Oh, that's okay. There's a webinar series. We hope that you can join us for one of the upcoming National Child Passenger Safety Board webinars next up in January. Oh, thank you. This is, you go to cpsboard.org/webinars, and the National Digital Check Form and CPST will be on Tuesday, January 17th from 2 to 3:30. And we will review the data and the data tools and explore ways in which these can be leveraged for educational outreach, reporting, and grant funding. So those of you that are grant funded, don't miss out. We will also learn how the data the NDCF provides does even more than identify misuse in needed areas of communication. So again, visit the board website. Next slide, please. And National Child Passenger Safety Board social media library. Don't miss out on having this valuable resource at your fingertips. It's cpsboard.org/social. And these are just a couple examples of that. And you can copy or save the image and share it on your own social media channel. So if that's one of your goals, you can always share that as well. And we have that library available to you always. Also, a reminder to visit cpsboard.org for technician, instructor, CPS coordinator, parent, and caregiver and NDCF resources coming up this week on Thursday, December 15th at 2 p.m. Hold My Clipboard, almost live. So on this special edition of HMC, joining the NDCF team are special guests Danielle Campbell from Florida, Claire Meyer from Maryland, and Brian, oh gosh, I don't want to say his name wrong, Rosher from Idaho, who will share their firsthand experience and insights into their program's use of National Digital Car Seat Check form. So you can sign up at cpsboard.org/webinars. And thank you all so very much. We are thrilled that you could join us. Valerie, again, thank you again, and Jessica for all of your support, as well as Justin and Tammy. This will be recorded, the webinar recording will be posted to cpsboard.org/recertification within 1 to 2 business days. And as a reminder for the child passenger safety technicians in attendance, the presentation qualifies for 1 community education credit. In order to earn this credit, attendance on this webinar is required for at least 45 minutes, and proof of attendance will be emailed 24 hours after this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a safe day, and thank you for all of your life-saving education and that you provide to your communities. Thank you so much.